book elaborated by rabbis rather than an attempt to describe in minuscule detail every aspect of the formal life of the founder. And similarly, for other religions, we are in this sense unique. An Abrahamic religion, monotheistic religion, Semitic religion, if you like. But what makes us distinctive is this idea of the sunnah. And because any thoughtful reflection on what is characteristic about Islam is always going to enrich us as we practice it, we need to think about why that should be the case. Why do we, unlike the other ummahs, have this particular emphasis on shaping ourselves in extraordinary forensic detail after the pattern of life of the founder? And there are certain gendered distinctions which are the only exceptions. There are no tribal or racial exceptions. There are certain gendered distinctions, but overwhelmingly the Prophet's sunnah is the sunnah for women as well. And there are certain distinctions which are necessary biologically, which can be mapped out by looking at the way of the Ummahat al-Mu'mineen, the mothers of the believers, radiyallahu anhum. But generally, this is what unites us as Muslims. Even the Shia will say, of course, the Holy Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, in the details of his life, is an authentic, authoritative example. وَلَقَدْ كَانَ لَكُمْ فِي رَسُولِ اللَّهِ أُسْوَةٌ حَسَنَةٌ. There was always for you in Allah's Messenger a goodly example. So the question presents itself, why? This rootedness in practice, and therefore in Homo sapiens, the form of the human body, is so axiomatic in the Islamic form of religion. What does that mean for those of us who, in the next few decades, are going to be confronting the real clash of civilizations, which is the clash between transhumanism and more traditional ways of doing business with our bodies and the world? We will find some support for this in our expectations of the end time, and in the basic adjectives that we apply to the way of Sayyidina Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Look at the quality of Islam as the religion of the Hunafa, bal millata Ibrahim Hanifa, the way of Ibrahim as a Hanif. Bu'ithtu bil Hanifiyati samha. I am sent with the tolerant and hospitable and noble Abrahamic primordial way. This idea of the Hunafa is to do with primordiality, a form of religion that predates the kind of religion that we think is the oldest from a secular perspective, which is worshipping images or trees in jungle clearings. The very oldest religion, because it's the religion of Sayyidina Adam, it's the religion of Jannah, the religion of the day of Alastu bi Rabbikum, the ancient primordial normalcy of human beings before the ego starts to intervene. So we have this idea of recapitulating sacred history by the Hajj, which takes us back to the Abrahamic specific foundations of our millah. But there's something older as well, which is also signified by the Kaaba. The Kaaba is, in a sense, two houses. It's not just the house of Sayyidina Ibrahim, alayhi salam, but it's also the house, according to the Hadith scholars, and according to Azraqi and the oldest histories we have of the city of Mecca, of Sayyidina Adam, which was the first place where human beings worshipped when the Kaaba was not, and there was just a red hillock, Rabwatun Hamra. That the primordiality of the Hajj is not just a journey back to the Abrahamic origins of being Hanif, but is a journey back to the beginning of what it is to be human. That's one of our rituals. As we journey to the Kaaba and chuck away the trivia of civilization and return to what matters in our humanity, we are also going back in time in the only ritual on the face of the earth that has never been interfered with or modernized. The Saudis, in their inconsequentiality, can build the world's biggest clock and the biggest branch of McDonald's and all of that, but they cannot detract from the presence of the city and the ancientness of the rituals. Even they do not presume to do that. So that's another thing that all Muslims can agree on, that there is a primordial ancient dimension to Islam, which is recapitulated in the religion which is the seal of the religions. And one of his titles, of course, in the Quran is Khatam al-Nabiyyin. He is the seal of the messengers. There is something about his inauguration of the last period in sacred history which recapitulates and takes us right back to the style of religion, to the fragrance of religion at the time of Sayyidina Ibrahim, Sayyidina Adam, alayhim as-salam. So does that take us any further when we look at this looming crisis? Well, I suspect that it does, but it's not going to point in the direction of an easy solution. My suspicion is that the fuqaha are going to be bewildered as they face the new reality of genetically engineered humanity, and the preponderance of philosophical thinking now is that probably this is going to take place, because if you can do away with cancer, you can do away with all of those ailments, you can make people see better, you can prevent them from ever forgetting anything. Inevitably, these things are going to become the realities that parents choose for their children. As the fuqaha deal with this, we are going to find that some of them kind of go along with it, uttering the usual nonsense about Islam as the modern religion, the religion of science, the religion of progress, and all of this other nonsense that we've never heard before in our history, but that so many of them desperately reach for. But we will also find a consensus and a majority, I think, who just say, no, we are not entitled to invalidate the books of fiqh. We can't change ourselves so that wudu and ghusl and Ramadan and those things no longer have the effect on the soul that they are supposed to have. We can't abolish the 5 pillars through science. That, I suspect, is, given the blessed conservatism of our deepest instincts, what is going to happen. And that will be a big crisis, because it will mean, I suspect, in about 50 years that humanity will be bifurcated even more than it is now. Just as it is now bifurcated essentially into the 75% who are either the consequences of progress or on the road to progress, and whose perception of the world is essentially an Enlightenment, secularized one, and for whom God happens once a week, and the 25% who essentially are protesting against that and saying, no, hold the phone, we don't believe in this, we think that the sacred to be itself has to be part of every dimension of life, the public as well as the private. That split that we're already seeing, which is the big split in today's world, is going to manifest itself in the way people are physically, with increasingly genetically engineered transhumans looking with amazement and Islamophobic contempt upon the Muslim Ummah, where I suspect the majority of people will not engineer their children in order to produce a generation of superhumans and thereby abolish most of the abwab or the chapters of the fiqh and the sharia. I suspect that's what's going to happen. What we're seeing now is just the preliminary to a much, much greater clash or divide. Sometimes we think, why are we always in the headlines? Why is it always us? Is this latest news item going to be about us again? But if you think about it, that is inevitable. Because if the way of Sayyidina Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam is the last ship of salvation, the last bus home, there's not going to be another big religious dispensation on its way, then necessarily it has within itself an inoculation that makes it very resistant to the virus of secularity. It's no coincidence that the last religion in history is also the one that modernity is struggling with the most. That's not an accident, that's how it has to be. Because we have in our inner metabolism a form of life and an approach to the unseen which is divinely sculpted and designed to enable us to retain a connection with the sacred in our profane time. In other words, we still uphold normalcy. And at the edges of that attempt, where it clashes with the abnormal quality of the modern world, there are all kinds of collisions and explosions and arguments and polemics and Islamophobia and
all of that is really inevitable. Not because